Most of the advice you are consuming about how to grow and scale a business is mathematically incorrect. It assumes that the problem in your business is lack of effort, volume, or leads. But when I look at the data across service providers stuck between $20 and $50,000 a month, their problem is never effort. The problem is always the structural integrity of their vehicle. And what do I mean by this? So you are operating a service-based vehicle. Now, this vehicle is designed to burn cognitive bandwidth as fuel. It requires you to be the primary processing unit for every single decision, every client emotion, and every single fulfillment metric. So, as you add more clients, you're burning more of that cognitive bandwidth fuel until you essentially hit cognitive overload. In the circles where real wealth is generated, we do not operate this service-based vehicle. They operate strategy vehicles where we obsess over asymmetry. Now you might be thinking, but does selling strategy actually work? Don't clients pay for results? And this is just a fundamental misunderstanding of value. Let's look at an example. So here we have the agency versus the strategy firm. So thinking about a traditional ads agency, which is a service-based vehicle, to make $1 million, they're going to need, 15 to 20 employees, account managers, creative directors, a bunch of different client Slack channels that are going 24/7. Now, the valuation of this type of company is going to be a 1 to 3x multiple of profit. Why? Because the business breaks without all of these people. Now, if we look at the strategy firm, for example, let's just say McKinsey and Company. What they don't do is they don't execute the work. They don't run ads. They don't provide labor to their clients. What they do is they sell IP. They sell a protocol or a methodology to their clients. And they're able to charge $500,000 for a 1 to 3 month engagement. Ultimately, they're selling the decision, not the labor. And consultancy firms trade at a 6x to 10x multiple of profit if you were to ever want to exit. Why? Because they own the IP. They own this IP. They don't own the labor. For another example, we have a GC versus the architect as a construction example. The GC is buying the wood. He's providing the labor. He's managing the crew. He's pouring the concrete. He's sweating in the sun. If it rains, he loses money. His margins are, let's just say, 10 to 20%. Now, the architect drafts the blueprints, which is the IP, or the protocol or methodology, the strategy. And he charges a percentage of the entire project up front. He hands them the plans and walks away with margins around 90%. Again, the contractor is driving the service vehicle, whereas the architect is driving a strategy-based vehicle. This one is trapped by the physics, right? The materials and the time, whereas the architect is only capped by his reputation. And this gives us a core piece of evidence that there is zero marginal cost of replication. So if you're writing copy or editing a video as a service, your cost to serve the next client is high, right? It's time and effort. But if you're stalling IP into a company, your cost to serve the next client is zero. It costs Microsoft $0 to sell another copy of Windows. It costs a strategy firm $0 to install their IP or their source code into more businesses. So wealth is not generated by working harder and providing more labor. Wealth is generated by reducing the marginal cost of replication to zero. This is why we drive strategy vehicles. This is why we obsess over asymmetry. Asymmetry is the gap between your input and your output. Input in this example would be cognitive bandwidth, output as revenue or profit. Now, if your input equals your output, you have no leverage. You're getting the same amount as a unit economic measurement as you put in. But we want to focus on increasing the output based on 1 unit of input. Now, this is why we can focus on higher leverage activities, because we have separated ourselves from the labor. And we can get higher multiples, higher returns on a unit of effort, which gives us more leverage. In this video, I'm going to deconstruct the 4 invisible laws of asymmetry within business, within service-based businesses. And these are the exact mechanisms that my private clients use to essentially fix their vehicle and go from separating their time from their income. If you don't know me, my name is Trevor. I own a strategy firm called 7Point, and we help a lot of domain experts build high profit consulting businesses. The first law is understanding what the market actually buys. So if you're struggling with your pricing, it is because you are selling labor, and labor is bound by the laws of supply and demand. Here we have quantity and price. So this intersection is the equilibrium price, also known as the market clearing price. So at this price point, the business attracts exactly enough clients to fill its available capacity without leaving some clients underserved. Said in another way, it's providing just enough service hours at a price point that consumers are willing to pay for. Now, if the price was higher, the business may have excess capacity, like maybe unbooked appointments or unbooked calls or something like that. And if it were lower, it would have a wait list or shortage of service availability. So reaching equilibrium suggests that we are operating efficiently based on our market dynamics of that specific niche. You're maximizing your resources, but you're maximizing all of these resources at this wage rate. Now, since there's always someone willing to do the work for less money than you, the equilibrium price is essentially a race to the bottom. Now, the strategic consultant operates a little bit differently. We don't play in the labor equilibrium game. We shift the curve. We don't sell billable hours. We sell certainty. We sell the solution to the specific problem. So why does the strategy firm sit here? It comes down to what we're actually selling. So up here, we are selling labor. Labor is a commodity. It's infinite. I could find 10,000 people to edit a video or run an ad. Because the effective supply of substitutable labor is extremely high, the market forces the price down. Now, this chart looks different because the strategy firm isn't selling labor. The demand already exists because the problem is expensive, urgent, it's unavoidable, which makes buyers far less sensitive to the price. What's scarce is not effort, but it's credible solutions that actually remove the risk. So when substitutes disappear, price stops being determined by competition. It starts being anchored to the cost of the problem. That is why the intersection sits low in terms of quantity and high on price without implying there is no demand or supply is zero. This is why we're able to charge anywhere from $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, $25,000 for a single engagement, while some agencies struggle to sell $2,000, $3,000 for a monthly retainer, because we're essentially selling in two different asset classes. Now, the smart people watching this are probably like, but wait, if supply is low, doesn't that mean there is no demand? Low supply does not equal low demand. They're what we call orthogonal variables. Like, this isn't a market with no demand. This is a market where demand exists outside or independent of suppliers. This is what we call the blue ocean trap. You likely think low competition means no customers. That is true if you're selling something that nobody wants, like underwater basket weaving or something. But remember, demand is not generated by you. Demand is generated by the problem. So if a business has, let's just say, $1 million problem, their demand for the solution is incredibly high because it's costing them a ton of money, which proves the demand curve right here. This is what we call inelastic demand. So whether the price is going to be $1,000 or $100,000, that business is going to need this problem gone. Now, the service provider is going to try to solve this with generic labor, which has incredibly high supply and therefore price crashes. Now, the strategy firm is going to solve this with their unique protocol or IP, which is low in supply. So we aren't going where there's no demand, and I'll give you an example in a second. We are going where there's massive pain, but low competent substitutable solutions. So let's look at an example. Maybe you say, I need to scale my ads. For this problem, there's high demand, but the supply of substitutable solutions is infinite. It's a ton, right? There's a ton of generic media buyers, which drives price down. Now, the strategy firm positioning would be more like, we are the only firm with the algorithmic protocol to fix this in 48 hours. That statement implies scarcity, a unique mechanism, and protocol implying IP, where we can actually demand higher prices for that generalized problem, right? Like, there's a ton of demand for this problem. So this doesn't mean that there's no demand. It means that our selling proposition, our mechanism of solving that problem is inherently different. So we're capturing existing expensive demand by being the only ones who can actually satisfy it. So this brings me to the asymmetry. What is the asymmetry here? It's this: the price of the solution is anchored to the cost of the problem, not the effort of the solver. However, a lot of you violate this law by charging monthly retainers. And I'll give you an example. So let's look at the physics of your bank account, for example. So day one, client signs. Excitement is at 100%. Value perception is absolutely peak here. Now, day 60, we'll call this day 60, 50% of the excitement and value perception remains because novelty is worn off. The problem is solved, value perception drops. Now, the trap is that your price stayed the same this entire time. And the moment the excitement drops below the price, or the value perception drops below the price, they're gonna resent paying you. And they start asking like, oh, what have you done for me lately? Or is this even working anymore? Like, a lot of the novelty and a lot of the value has already dropped significantly. The shift is we need to stop being landlords collecting rent. We become the architects collecting capital. We're charging large engagement fees, again, anywhere from $5,000 to $25,000 and up. So we're capturing a lot of the value at its highest position on day one, and we get the cash flow to actually run the business. We can pump it into ads. We can buy, pay for a team. We can buy software. So think about it. If I give you $15,000 right now, you could go buy ads. You could go hire killer editors, maybe add some setters or something like that. You have the war chest to be able to scale. But if I gave you $2,000 a month for 8 months, you can't really do anything. It's like that $2,000 every month is going to bleed dry. It's not going to make any big impact. So you're starving slowly. We need to focus on getting this money up front because it forces commitment from the client and it gives you a clear war chest to dominate later on. The second law is all psychological. This is status asymmetry. This dictates how the market perceives your value. So you're likely suffering from what I like to call helper fallacy. You think that in order to charge high ticket, I have to provide a high touch service. You're texting them back instantly. You're staying on calls overtime when you don't need to. You're essentially acting like a nurse. But in the high ticket economy, status is inverse to availability. So the nurse, let's look at this example. The nurse is always available. She's holding your hand. She's constantly checking in on you. She's there pretty much every hour, checking in, super available, and she makes around $80,000 per year. But if we look at the surgeon, he is incredibly unavailable. He walks in, he does that specific protocol, that surgery, in order to essentially save your life, right? He's super unavailable, and he's making around, let's just say, $1 million per year. When you're more available, you're essentially a commodity. And when you're unavailable, you are the prize. My clients operate with this strategic apathy. They'll say something like, here's the data. We'll say something like, here's the solution or the protocol or IP. And then ultimately, we say take it or leave it, right? Because they could choose to implement this IP, the protocol, the decision or not, or they could, execute and get the results. So paradoxically, this makes the client trust you more. They can smell that you don't need their money. And that's what makes them want to give it to you even more. If we think about it, right? The coach is going to get emails like, hey, can we hop on a call? Or like, hey, I'm feeling stuck. The strategist is going to get emails like, hey, here's the data that you asked for. I'm ready for the next step. So one effectively drains your energy and the other fuels your business. So my clients don't pay me to hold their hand as like a cheerleader. They pay me for a clinical diagnosis where we implement an audit, prescribe, and execute framework. We audit their current business and find all of the holes in their business. Then we prescribe a solution or a fix or a protocol to fix those holes. And then the client executes those findings. This is how you shift from a helpful coach to a clinical strategist. And your clients stop treating you like an employee and they start listening to you like an expert. Law number 3 is all about leverage. This is what I call operational asymmetry. Right now, you're probably treating every client like a blank canvas. You're building a custom plan for every single one, which essentially makes you an artist. A strategy firm doesn't build from scratch for every single client. Think about a franchise like McDonald's, right? You pay them for the IP, the systems, the branding, the recipes in order for them to effectively solve your hunger problem, right? In the quickest way possible. Obviously, there's a sacrificing of quality there, but think about it like Microsoft too. They don't code new operating systems for every single laptop. They install the same IP onto a bunch of different devices. And you need to think about your methodology like this. You need to think about your business like this, your fulfillment like this, where we look at the first principles, right? What are the universal principles, the laws of your niche that never change? Then we have assets that solve 80% of the problem automatically, and the systems to be able to sustainably implement for our operations. So we are effectively installing our IP into a ton of different companies. And this is how we're able to operate at such a high efficiency level, is by selling the same product to different people, not by selling different labor to different people. Now, the final law is where 99% of service providers fail. It is the law of bandwidth protection. Your brain only has a certain amount of processing power per day. So if you're spending 60% of your time, of your bandwidth, managing client emotions or answering a bunch of Slack messages, or you're checking in, you have zero bandwidth left for high leverage, strategic thinking. So the service provider would look something like Zoom calls, getting into the funnel here, emotions. They have Slacks or texts, just a bunch of noise that's going in, which is causing cognitive overload and giving us basically zero strategic thinking, because all of our cognitive bandwidth is dumbed down by all this noise. Strategy firms practice radical subtraction. This would look like, submitting a ticket. Client has a problem, they submit a ticket to us, and what we do is we provide a Loom breakdown to resolve their problem. This is what we call asynchronous execution. Submit a ticket, here's a Loom video breakdown. Why is this better? I can think more clearly on a Loom video than I can on a live call where I'm getting put on the spot, and then the call gets thrown into a ton of different directions. Maybe they have follow-up questions, or maybe they're continuing to ask questions, and now your availability is shot, your status is decreasing. And at the same time, you can record a 5-minute solution in the same time that it takes for them to schedule a 60-minute meeting. So we could have already solved the problem in the same amount of time that it took them to even schedule or book the call. And the client can re-watch that Loom as well. And the question is, do we ever talk on live calls? Yeah, of course we do. We reserve live calls for strategy, like high-level strategy. You're currently playing in a game you can't win. You're selling labor in a market that wants judgment and certainty. You could keep doing that, but the market will eventually price you out, as we discussed in law number 1. Or you could flip the asymmetry and sell judgment and sell scarcity, sell IP and protocols. I don't sell courses on this. I don't sell courses in general. I run a strategy firm, as I mentioned, but I do live calls breaking down live audits for businesses like this, where we go over our pricing models, our systems, our fulfillment frameworks that will allow you to operate with this strategic clarity. Again, we do it live on a call, book or don't. The logic is going to remain the same.